This meeting is being recorded. It's also being transcribed for AI Companion. Zoom meeting. Zoom workplace. This meeting is being recorded. It's also being transcribed for AI Companion. Anyone with access to the recording may view or share it with others. This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava. Today's guest
has
is
spotlighted your video for everyone.
Hello and welcome to Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava. I'm very delighted today to bring you an interesting guest that I have been working together with for some time now. He is an historian, a historical researcher, and an entrepreneur. He is Stephen Castro. Welcome to Do You See What I See, Stephen?
The
Thank you.
host has spotlighted your video for everyone. Chrome Legacy window. Chrome Legacy window. Zoom Workplace.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure.
Steve, I have to give you a little bit of time to describe what it is that you do. We have known each other for a number of years through your work with the iconic Professor Juan Gomez Quiñones, who we both knew from UCLA and who also was a compadre of mine. And he unfortunately passed a few years ago. But you worked with him for a number of years, and you're also doing historical research on the city of Santa Monica. Tell us some of the other things that you're engaged with.
So right now, I own a little flower shop in Santa Monica. Kind of a little bit different in terms of, the historical research that we've done, in some projects that I've done with in conjunction with the city of Santa Monica. Um, I I've been working with the flowers for about, I would say, 5 years. During the pandemic, I decided that I wanted to do something a little different, and a friend suggested that maybe we could work together. I wanted to invest in a little business. I wasn't too sure, and he was a phenomenal florist, and I kind of was really impressed with that, and I went along with it, and I would say within a year I was able to open up a retail location here in Santa Monica, just kind of at the tail end of the pandemic. And so basically I was working with flowers, and I still am. Right now I'm just kind of in transition. I'll be opening up a new location in conjunction with an Ethiopian market space, and it's very community oriented. And It's kind of also another project with the city of Santa Monica. And so I'm very excited about that. Also, I am an advocate for children with autism. As you know, my son is autistic. He's higher functioning, and I really am interested in seeing how we can further do more research in that field, and also change some policies as it relates to certain resources. And so those are kind of the things that I've been working with lately, aside from our historical projects that we've been doing.
Well, I have to say that when you and I first met, it was back in before COVID, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Uh, and you were working, you had worked with, since you were a graduate student where you student at UCLA, you had worked with Juan Gomez Quiñones, who unfortunately has passed. But he was doing, you were recording for him and with him a series of interviews that we did because he wanted to capture the history of the Chicana women's movement. And of course, I was one of the early founders of that group, along with Supervisor Gloria Molina, who later became a supervisor because of her involvement in activism. So these overlapping threads are rather interesting. And over time, after Juan passed, you and I began working on some important projects, and one of them is the inquest into the death of Ruben Salazar. Talk about why that is such a challenging, difficult, sticky wicket issue. It's really been put to sleep deliberately. And it is a very complex issue. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, as you know, I've been working with Juan. I really wasn't at the time I was working with him. I was kind of more of an assistant at the time, and so he was still teaching. And I remember sitting at the DMV of all places, and he gave me um, a proposal that he wanted to submit to the County of Los Angeles that would acknowledge the death or the whole August 29th event. And I, for whatever reason, I remember reading about that and
Anne put in waiting room. Anne
reading,
has entered the waiting room for this meeting. Press F6.
reading about that in some of his classes and
Anne put in
discussing
waiting
it.
room. Anne has left the waiting.
And
Anne has joined the meeting.
I and so I wasn't I was more. I was kind of on the fence, to be quite honest, you to use that cliche. But
Space.
when we
Speech
first
on
started
demand.
that, before I kind of get into why this is important, because there's so much more. And so some of the things that we started to do was to really look at the event from a different perspective. And the discourse kind of has two different sides. You have the side that the county um, you know, settled as it related to Ruben Salazar and the death, right? That it was an accident, right? And then there's certain people and a discourse and some films that somewhat sympathize more so with the accident, and then there's a whole opposite side that would say that it was intentional. And Juan was very adamant, as yourself, that it was intentional. And so we we really wanted to take an approach. Juan wanted to do a real detailed timeline of the events of August 29th. And that was like one of the things he had discussed. And so I remember him saying, maybe if you're interested, maybe you can, look some names up. And one of the things that I have always been fascinated with was using a different, I think, perspective. And I think true crime kind of came up at the time. I don't know why. Um, but there was a really important case that was brought up just recently. It had to do with the death of an actress, and I can't remember her name at this moment. She died in Catalina Island, and there was some rumors about maybe her husband at the time might have pushed her, maybe I'll come up with the name. And one of the kind of historical figures that was really um, crucial to this particular homicide case was a coroner or medical examiner pathologist in Los Angeles County in the 1960s, Thomas Noguchi. And Juan was really fascinated with the angle because it was Thomas Noguchi's office as coroner of Los Angeles County that did the examination of Ruben Salazar. And it was a fascinating angle, and I felt like it was something that I could maybe help out with. At the time, I was doing notary work, so I was really working with vital documents, and I thought that was something that would be a real interesting project. So we took that angle, and so it's kind of started from there. And one of the things we wanted to really understand more so was why were there documents that were missing? They 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 for whatever reason they were either destroyed or purged, but Los Angeles County didn't make them available for whatever reason. And that was something that we were really fascinated with, and it was kind of a red flag. So um, we were kind of rather, I was put to the task to figure that out because I spent a lot of time in archives, especially county archives, whether they were certificates of death or birth, marriage, or even tax records. But so from there, we were able to kind of dig around, and it took about a year, I would say. And one of the things that, speaking with um, s- some of the individuals that were writing extensively about this, were that there were some documents that were missing. And so before I get to that part, um, I wanted to figure out if we can maybe even find, some vital records as they related to the event. And so Juan wanted to get some certificates of birth or birth certificates for his daughters. So we just took an afternoon, and we went over to Norwalk, where the county recorder's office is. And so I didn't think anything of it. And I remember telling him that downstairs in the bottom floor, there's actually an office where you could get death certificates. And surprisingly, a lot of the tabloid people in Los Angeles are frequent this office, because usually if there's a celebrity that dies under suspicious circumstances, they're there. And one of the rules is that you cannot take photos, right, of the documents, which we had the opportunity to do. So um, and I know this because I remember I was working a probate case where we were trying to find family members, and so so I kind of had a little familiarity with this particular it's a little office too. So I remember looking up Salazar's name. I took one hit, and it came back as it wasn't in the files. I just couldn't figure out. So we did it again, and sure enough, Salazar's death certificate comes up, and surprisingly, we pull it up, and there was tons of information that came from that document. And I remember this. Juan at the time congratulated me. I couldn't figure it out, He's like, "Congratulations," And but what happened is that we really cracked this case open, because that certificate told us a lot about what had happened in the previous couple of months after, and a little bit before. And I did take a photo of it, but not a full photo. It was just kind of not the best, but it was something that we were able to, hold on to. And we also took some photos, or rather, we also requested the documents of the two individuals that were killed, or that died as a result of that day. One was a young kid that was 16, who was a Brown Beret, Theodore Lynn Ward, and another individual, his last name is Diaz, and he was shot by the sheriffs a little couple of blocks down the street from the park. And so I was able to get that. And then there was another protesting the August 29th protest in January of 71. And it was a kid who was Jewish, and felt very a sense of duty to protest with the Chicanos, because his parents were in the Holocaust. And so we were able to pull that certificate, and from there it really opened up the case for us, or rather, the research. And so I remember Juan was able to write a couple of papers just on those documents, and kind of include more information in terms of what the history books had at the time.
Let
We
me
went,
stop you for a moment, because I think I need to create a little bridge here, because there may be people here who haven't been watching, the show, or listening
absolutely.
to the show, and to catch them up on perhaps some facts of history, because there may be some people here who remember those days, and there may be some people here who haven't a clue about what happened on August 29th, 1970. when there was a Chicana moratorium in East Los Angeles, 30,000 people showed up to protest the Vietnam War and also to demand equal opportunities for the returning Mexican American veterans in healthcare, housing, and employment. 25% of the war dead in that moratorium, which was designated to be a peaceful event, which was infiltrated, and there was violence that was initiated not by the moratorium people themselves, but by deliberate actions on parties that we cannot totally identify, but we have suspicions. And so I'm not going to name any names, but the usual parties that you have and things like this, where like the 4 people that were killed during the anti-Vietnam War in Iowa State, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's all these things are interconnected, and we've never been able to connect them until you start looking back in time. So we had Ruben Salazar was a very beloved journalist. He worked for the Los Angeles Times. He did a lot of work in Latin America as well, but he worked for the Los Angeles Times, did a regular reporting and columns. He also was at the Spanish language television station KMEX television, and he had a role there as well. I think he was doing sports then, but he was also doing commentating. He later became, an executive there at Channel 34. So he was a beloved and very credible journalist. He happened to be reporting about police brutality. He was told to stop. He was threatened. And all of a sudden, on August 29th, he knew he was fingered. He cleared out his offices and he was killed that day. So that's the backstory of the Ruben Salazar story. What's interesting here, and what Steve and I have been working on together, is what are the elements? What actually happened that day? How is it that he was killed? The sheriff that shot him with a flight right canister designed to go through a cement block wall, which was fired through a cloth curtain into a room, into a bar in a local neighborhood in East Los Angeles, it was considered an accident. And yet, when you start looking at these records that Steve has been looking at and exploring, and the fact that so many records were just suddenly disappeared and not able to be looked at and questioned, it's still a conundrum of a story. It probably should be one of those unsolved mystery television shows, but it probably has dynamics that are too deep and too ugly and too hairy to bring to light, certainly at this point in history. So that's where it is. One of the things that shows up in this exploration, we're going to call it an exploration. The research has been ongoing now for several years, and some people have been looking at this for decades. There's a gentleman a professor who has archives in his home, and he's been working on it. But this is still a really unsolved puzzle. We have very clear ideas. We know it was not an accident. A Congressman, Esteban Torres, who at the time was a labor leader in East Los Angeles, was invited to the inquest that was held, and also the documentarian who officially covered the inquest for KCET television, the public broadcasting station, also had witnessed police brutality and later told me, and he's in my book, It's All in the Frijoles, that the inquest was a whitewash. So, and Congressman Torres referred to it as a sham, and they walked out, certain community leaders that were there. So that's kind of a background story. So Steve, let's look at the challenges of looking at something that happened so many years ago, the perhaps sloppiness of the, what do you call it? When they look at the body afterwards, when they're trying to determine what happened, what was the cause of death when they're in the mortuary and they're doing all of that research and they have to write reports about that. There are questions there. Things don't seem to sync up. We're not sure exactly what time of day he was killed. We are here that the body was moved. Why was it moved? Why was evidence altered in that way? I happened to talk to a witness, an eyewitness who was there that morning, and everything that he says and told me for no reason to lie to me. I was coming in shell shocked from being tear gassed at the park that day and trying to walk back to my car. I was alone and terrified and in shell shock. And he told me the true story of that. So it's what happened. And so we're trying to unravel all these pieces. So Steve, talk about the timeline of events that went on that day and and what the mystery continues to be.
So I believe the timeline was the march would have started at Belvedere Park, which I believe is on First. Go up. I don't know what street. I know Belvedere Park. It was going to go up to Atlantic and then go south and then turn down Whittier Boulevard and end at Laguna Park, which is now Salazar Park, where there would have been some entertainment, and just everybody meeting. Conditions of the day were extremely hot. This was August. Our rather our hottest, warmest month of the year. And and so from the sources and kind of eyewitnesses say that everything was fine, and there was a liquor store. I would say around Whittier, it was on Whittier, called the Green Mile Liquor Store. People were coming in and out of that liquor store getting water. And in fact, the late historian Mike Davis actually said he was in there, if I'm not mistaken. And he had gotten, he had gotten something and then went back to the march, and so people were frequenting that liquor store. At some point, the sheriff's department received a report that there was an armed robbery, and so with that, the sheriff's deputies converged on the area, and it started from there. Once the sheriff's deputies started to converge, more and more, I believe, police began to respond to that general area, and essentially within, a certain amount of time, you had kind of the sheriffs out there, and they were somewhat trying to use force um, you know, uh, to control the area. Not that there was a lot going on, but at some point you see this historic footage of the sheriffs using, force. They were using their billy clubs. They were hitting people. They were using gas. And I would say within seconds, you have a convergence of sheriff's deputies at the park. And one thing led to another. And I think you were there, right? I
I
know
was
that.
in the park. The park was peaceful. There was dancing going on. A young dance group was performing on a very large stage that blocked one whole side of the park. And there was a baseball backstop at the far end of the park. So people were in an area where there was a liquor store at the back end, and then there was a stage blocking the whole side of the street, and families, grandparents, fathers with children on their shoulders, mother with nursing babes in arms. People were on blankets, sitting there, relaxed, possibly picnicking and listening to music and speeches that were on stage. It was a peaceful park until there was a brouhaha out there, something that happened. Somebody threw a bottle or a rock, or was claimed to have thrown a bottle or a rock, and the sheriffs came in with batons and tear gas. I got tear gassed. I couldn't see for a brief period of time, and I got help to get out of the park and escape behind that backdrop because I wasn't going to hang around for any beatings with a club. But you could hear the thud thud of the batons coming down on heads and back. I wrote a poem about it. And it was very ugly and very dark. In fact, it shakes me up now even to be mentioning it. But the surround was peaceful. The walk and march itself was peaceful. And there was no brouhaha, there was no violence until after the sheriffs came crashing down on heads and backs in the park, and people had to escape. Then there was a riot on Whittier Boulevard. Everything was broken up. I walked by those streets trying to escape and get back to my car, and it looked like a war zone. So there are mixed stories that come out of this, but the fact of the matter is that the police were there in advance. There were cars parked all over that area of East Los Angeles, according to another eyewitness who was there the night before and saw all of these black and white cars kind of sequestered away under bridges, on side streets, but very, very present and ready for action. So something was up in advance of the actual events that took place that day.
Absolutely.
Anyway, from there.
So, from what I get, it's unclear how this started. There's so many different stories, and it gets even it gets really interesting. Now, as in respect to Ruben Salazar, he was with he was with his crew at the time, and
Channel 34.
yes, and so they're witness to this, right? And just to kind of fast forward, there's a couple. Well, before I go there, there's a couple issues that you and I kind of had picked up. The time sequences never seem to really make sense, and we could never really make sense of it. People's concept of time was just off. The witnesses, even in the transcripts from the inquest, they seem to it just doesn't match. But from there, Ruben Salazar, kind of after this assault on the community, it ends up at kind of fast forward. He ends up at this bar, the Silver Dollar Bar. He wanted to him and his crew wanted to come in and into the bar. He needed to make a phone call, and then probably just have a couple of drinks and kind of take in everything. And this is where it gets even more complex, I think. And make a long story short, there's a couple of people that are claiming that there was a robbery that occurred. Again, there's a report of a crime, and it brings the law enforcement back into the picture where they come into the bar. And so what I understand is, and just reading from the transcripts, is that Deputy Wilson was responding to that, and he runs to the door with the flight right, kind of which is a projectile, responding to a report that there was a person with a gun inside of the bar, and he runs to the door. And he claims to make a command, everybody down, or everybody, rather not so much down, but everybody put your hands up. And for whatever reason, I don't know exactly if there was words exchanged, but he shoots this gun with a projectile with the gas, kind of like a gun, right? A regular firearm into the bar, which fatally hits Ruben Salazar in the temple, and he dies automatically. He dies instantly. And that's kind of what really is, that's kind of what happens, right? That kind of opens up this
Well,
whole...
that's a story that has been told officially, which may not be the full story.
And so his position was that, oh, it was an accident, I didn't see anything. And that was just, that brings up much more questions, many more. And so that's kind of like the backstory. This is kind of what happens. And so the thing is, there was a lot of controversy with this event. And essentially, Ruben Salazar dies. And there was a lot of, talk in terms of, maybe it was a hit, as opposed to an accident. So the activists at the time organized, and as you can see, they were, very, very adamant that Ruben Salazar was assassinated. And so with that as the backstory, we got really, really lucky in terms of our research, right? And so let me kind of get into this story that's so much related to that. And 2021, the summertime, Juan, and he was, I think he may have passed away a couple months later, calls me and he says, "Hey, I got some really good news. We have this professor in Whittier, Raymond Mireles, who taught at ELAC, East Los Angeles Community College. I think you should give him a call." And so I called him and we talked a little bit about, this event. And, he was telling me what he thought had happened. It's a whitewash. It was a sham, at least the inquest. And me and Yolanda made an appointment with him some months later. And the first time, nothing really came about it, right? I think it was hard for him to really get into the story, as you recall. And we kind of touched on it. So I knew that we really have to kind of go back and maybe ask him some more questions. At the same time, he had archives in his garage, that was kind of his office. And at the time, he was writing a book about August 29th. And so I would say within a year, maybe even less than that, I would say about 9 months, we were emailing back and forth. And I was really curious about the autopsy report, because I was really fascinated with Noguchi at the time, the coroner, because he was a high profile medical examiner, and as we see, he wrote some books about celebrities. He's known for Marilyn Monroe's autopsy and some other high profile people at the time, and eventually that would pretty much get him into some trouble later on in his career. And so he emailed me an excerpt from the autopsy report, and it just had a description of the flight right, which brought up so many different questions, because something like that is extremely destructive if it hits somebody. And so me and Yolanda and another friend of ours who was a graduate student at UCLA, she was in one of the social work programs at UCLA, went and visited him. And I don't know what changed, because he wasn't going to help us. He wasn't going to give us a lot of information. And for whatever reason, my friend had his notebook, Apple tablet or computer, and basically we were able to gain access to the transcripts from the inquest, which had been missing for well over 50 years. And that was another big development in our research. And I think we sat on that for a while. We were just reading through the different statements that were given. I thought some of the testimony from the detectives were interesting. Brought up much more questions. There was testimony that was given by Deputy Wilson, and for about a year, I really wasn't hyper focused on the project, because I was, still at the time working with my, I had my work as, with the flowers. And it wasn't until 2023 I read the examiner. Was it Noguchi? It was one of the other examiners that did the autopsy. And I read the testimony, and something I missed came up. And what it was, and this changes the discourse, in my opinion, Ruben Salazar, had received shotgun pellets, or what was described as bird shot, was identified in his scalp at the autopsy. And the examiner at the time testified that the bird shot pellets that were in Salazar's scalp were no older than 6 months. And that broke open the case for us, because then apparently with a statement like that, it means that he was shot with a shotgun. I I didn't know what to weigh that against. So I did some. I called a couple people and I asked them, "Do you realize that that was actually testified to?" I don't. They didn't know. I don't know if it was because those transcripts were missing, but they just didn't know. So I called up another uh, person who was actually writing a book, and he actually had the examination report. Uh, However, on his side of the report, that fact was not entered into the autopsy. So there wasn't anything that was discovered. And that was a real big problem for us, or rather, it was a big problem because in one case, you have an autopsy examination report where that wound wasn't discovered, but then it was testified. And so that brings up so many different questions. One of them was he shot before? It didn't say anything. Was it an accident? The individual that I did speak to that actually had that autopsy report had spoken to Ruben Salazar's daughter and said it was. She thought maybe it was a um, a BB gun pellet that he was shot in the head with as a kid, but there were multiple fragments that were actually discovered at autopsy, at the autopsy, um, in his skull. So that kind of um, brings up so many different questions in terms of what really happened to him. And it's just, it seems to get much more and more complex. So we seem to think that there's more to what, number one, the county is saying is an accident, and other bigger questions. And my thing was, is this just about writing LA Times articles about police corruption, or was there something even bigger that Salazar might have known? And I was more of on the side that he probably had more information that goes beyond kind of what's happening in the city of Los Angeles as it relates to the LAPD. And then also my position was is this was a top-down assassination from the Nixon administration. Nixon had it out for the Chandler or Otis Chandler, the owner at the time, because Otis Chandler didn't. I mean, it's kind of one fascinating thing. Otis Chandler did not endorse Richard Nixon in 60, I believe it's 68, and it really rubbed him the wrong way. So he really went after Otis Chandler to the point where he was actually arrested for having an undocumented worker. And I believe it was an undocumented worker that, and this would be Otis Chandler, the former owner of the LA Times, and so I felt that there was more to that that angle, but we I'm more. I'm more certain that this was a political assassination, and we just have to kind of keep going to see what really happened and what exactly did Ruben Salazar have. He drove a Volkswagen Bug, and that day after he was murdered, his Bug showed up at the sheriff's station, and when I think some of his friends went inside of it, it was empty. And so there is so much, and I think in my kind of opinion that I'm sure we're going to learn in the next couple of years. But that's kind of where I am right now. One suggestion was that Salazar was really keen on foreign policy as it related to, and we're seeing this today, by the way, right? We're seeing some of this policy in Central America, South America, as we have the Curtin administration, doing what they're doing, in Mexico and kind of in other parts of South America, in terms of, the boats that they're seeing, right? But Salazar kind of had I seem to think, and just speaking to another researcher, is that he kind of knew that Nixon was going to make a big push for supporting some of the regimes, like in Chile. And that was a really big kind of shift in foreign policy at the time. And that may have been another reason why he was, put in the position that he was. But that's kind of what we have. And I think it does change. It does change the narrative for me. You don't see that. And there's other questions. Why do you have an examination report of the autopsy, and then you have what he was, the examiner, Los Angeles County coroner, testifying to? That document is fascinating, by the way, but it's also very confusing. It's hard to make sense of the time sequences, from what some of the witnesses were saying.
Well, we've had a number of very puzzling, controversial deaths, murders possibly,
Absolutely.
internecine warfare, whatever it is. When I was working for CBS and KCBS in the 80s, I covered the, oh God, his name just blanked out of my mind, the football player, the murder that he was involved in. Oh God, I'm thinking Otis Chandler, and I'm not.
O.J. Simpson.
Pardon me?
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. Simpson. Thank you, Becky. O.J. Simpson, and also Marilyn Monroe. There were a lot of things that were going on over different periods of time, which are subjects for another story. But I would say to the viewers and listeners that in the last couple of months, in August specifically, and in October, I did an interview with Rosalio Munoz, who coordinated the Chicana moratorium of August 29th, 1970, that Steve was referring to earlier, and which was, the day of the event of the moratorium and the deaths of, 4 people, including Ruben Salazar, of course, who was the most prominent and known of all the people that died, and that is believed to have been an assassination rather than an accident. So the story goes on. There's more work to be done on it, but I would say listen into what Rosalio Munoz had to say about what went on the August 29th, 1970 moratorium. And for perhaps people that are listening now, you might not even know about that event or the importance of it. It's significant because 25% of the war dead were Mexican American, when Mexican Americans were only 4% of the national population. That, of course, has shifted dramatically, in the last 50 years plus. But it's important to look at these threads that could set the tenor for what we're seeing today, a more advanced version of what was going on then. But we don't usually connect the dots in history. And these are kind of unsolved mysteries and things that need to be delved into, because they can help us understand better incidents that have gone on in the last 50 years and incidents that are taking place today.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you, Steve,
You're
for
welcome.
giving us some of this background. There's much, much more to it. And it is a fascinating unsolved mystery. And we all love a mystery, and we love to see justice. And that's really what this is about, is how do we maintain justice? How do we keep justice? How do we make sure that justice is served when, these various departments are engaged in activities and various entities are coming in and perhaps colliding and clashing in their intentions and in their the duties that are their responsibilities. So I want to thank you, and
You're welcome.
be sure and tune in next month, because we'll have a very interesting guest, Carter Hayward, who is one of the 11 Philadelphia Episcopalian women priests, the first 11 Episcopalian women priests in our history, going back over 50 years. And she has a very important book that she's written called 7 Deadly Sins, not about carnal sins, but about the 7th sin is gun violence. So you can figure out what that book is about. So I want to thank you for joining me on Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava. Thank you.
Thank you.